Good morning, MacBook development team. I'm curious what you guys have planned for 2023. Huh? Oh, I guess we should do something. Okay, you know how the iPhone 14 got like a plus this last year? Yes. Are you drunk? No, officer, I swear to drunk. I'm not God. But we think we should probably have like a MacBook Air Plus, you know, like a big one that's cheap, unlike the Pros. Alright, you understand that, like, no one is buying the iPhone 14 Plus, right? Oh, what, really? I didn't know that. I thought that would sell. It's actually selling even worse than the iPhone 12 and 13 mini. Oh. I guess it's because it's convincing everybody to just buy the Pros anyway. That's correct. So I guess if we just made a bigger MacBook Air, it wouldn't sell very well, but it would just make everybody buy the new MacBook Pros. Yes, I think that would be the natural outcome. You're a genius! Would you like some more eggnog? Yes, please! Let's begin. Ross Young, a supply chain analyst who's gotten a lot of things right in the past, came forward saying that production for the display panels that Apple is going to be putting in a 15-inch MacBook Air should be starting in the first quarter of 2023, which, in case you weren't aware, that starts in like a couple weeks. So because we haven't seen, you know, new Mac filings in the Eurasian database, I think a lot of people are jumping the gun on this one a bit and just assuming that, well, if production is starting for the new display panels, that means the 15-inch MacBook Air is launching at like the spring event in March. And while that would be kind of exciting, and I hope it does happen, because as of right now, there's like not a lot of long-term rumors we've been hearing about what Apple could be launching in March of 2023, except the mixed reality headset, but that's been delayed too, because it always is delayed perpetually. But I do think it would be really fun if we could have a spring event where we get, I don't know, the M2 Mac Mini. And yes, getting things sooner rather than later is always fun, but the one part I have a hard time believing is like, okay, sure, Apple wants to do a larger MacBook that's cheaper than a MacBook Pro, so I'm assuming the way Ross Young knows about this display panel is it's not ProMotion and it's not mini LED, but it is a large screen, and because the MacBook Pros have all switched to XDR and ProMotion and all that, this has to be some kind of, you know, middle grade MacBook. And if they're dropping it in the spring, do you give it the M2 chip, or why not just wait until the summertime, you know, at Dub Dub? That's where the M2 MacBook Air launched. Kind of makes more sense in my head that they would have the redesigned MacBook Air in the summer of 2022, and now they introduce the 15-inch MacBook Air with a refresh to both models in the summer of 2023. That way they could maybe get an M3 chip in there. It could be built on a more improved architecture, so it's not just, hey, by the way, there's another MacBook Air. It's like, hey, here's some speed improvements and a new size to choose from. So that's why I'm predicting that even though production for these panels is starting in the first quarter, I don't think it's actually going to launch until June. Apple seemed to be pretty happy to have hardware back in their software-focused event, but I think that's just me being wishful thinking, because I just really think it would be awkward given the overall tech community kind of underwhelming reaction to the M2 chip, especially in the fanless design on the MacBook Air, plus the single NAND, which meant the read and write speed was not that much better than the M1 MacBook Air, arguably worse in many situations. You really just want to ship a bigger version of that generation MacBook Air. You know, it's not the worst laptop in the world, but I think there's some more performance improvements and thermal improvements we'd all like to see alongside an introduction to a newer size. And what really I think bugged people the most about the M2 MacBook Air wasn't necessarily the design or the performance, it was just the overall price hike it got. $1,200, and once you spec it up to 512 gigs, it gets awfully close in price to a discounted, you know, refurbished 14-inch MacBook Pro, which many would argue is just so much better. And if you argue that you don't care about those MacBook Pro features, well, that's kind of what the big redesign was with the M2 MacBook Air, was bringing a bunch of Pro features like MagSafe and the notch and the better headphone jack and the redesigned chassis. So it's like, if you don't care about MacBook Pro features, you probably won't care about the M2 MacBook Air anyway. So it's like, if you're gonna spend more than the M1 MacBook Air, you might might as well go all the way. And I think that's probably gonna be the weirdest thing about this 15-inch MacBook Air. I know a ton of people that would buy it, for the record. I have run into many people in my life that are just like, I want a bigger laptop. I need a bigger display than 13 inches, but they're not necessarily using it for power-intensive things, right? They don't need the 16-inch MacBook Pro for all of its weight, all of its giant battery, and all of its M1 Pro and Max goodness. There's definitely a market, in my opinion, out there for people that are fine with a fanless, completely silent MacBook that's not incredibly fast. And frankly, if my theory is right, and they do put the M3 chip in there, that's probably going to outperform the M2 chip by quite a margin. It's already pretty capable. It's already a pretty fast chip, and not everyone out there needs like an M1 Pro or Max chip with a big thermal envelope and a dedicated cooling system, but there's definitely people that would appreciate the bigger screens. So I think the sweet spot that Apple's gonna price it in, you know, we've got M1 MacBook Air still for $1,000, $1,200 for the M1 MacBook Air, and then it's $2,000 for the M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro. So most people are assuming it's gotta be somewhere in there, kind of like how the 14 Plus is $100 roughly cheaper than the 14 Pro. That's what makes me think that it's not going to be that much cheaper, because it's a larger display, and that partially means probably a big battery as well. I think it's going to be sitting close to $17.99, and I think that is intentionally going to cause a bit more of the decoy effect, which I think is Tim Cook's latest innovation. Just figuring out a way to put like an awkward product in the lineup that is just a little bit less expensive than the next tier, and that just makes you more likely to get that next tier because it's not that much more. So I know what you all want it to be. I know that the general consensus of the public is, well, the 15-inch MacBook Air, because it's so similar to the 13-inch, it should only cost $200 or $300 more. But keep in mind, simultaneously, the price difference between the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro, even though they have a ton in common, same kind of speaker system, same kind of displays, same keyboards and all that, still, Apple puts $500 between those two MacBooks. So if you apply that kind of logic to the M2 MacBook Air, and the reason I'm rounding up and assuming it'll be $17.99 is because you also got to keep in mind, if they make it too cheap, it's going to severely eat into sales of their highest priced MacBook Pro. If you start convincing a bunch of people to not buy 16-inch MacBooks, then they're probably going to want a little bit thicker margin on that 15-inch Air. So I'm predicting the price, similar to its little brother, to be somewhat disappointing, but overall, I do think some people will find use for it. Hopefully it sells better than the 14 Plus does. But how do you guys feel about a 15-inch MacBook Air? Does that make sense to you? And do you think Apple should consider doing this in more lineups? Like, should Apple make a 12.9-inch iPad Air? They got nothing else to do with iPad OS and you're just trying to get creative with more hardware options. Yeah, let's complicate the iPad lineup even more. All that good stuff. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And thank you to everyone supporting this channel on Tailosive Tech Pro. Seriously, helps me out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Shape here, and I'll see you all in the next one.